Hey everyone, welcome to part 113 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll refactor using items from battle using the state stack architecture, and we'll also handle things like throwing Pokeball and catching Pokemon in a much cleaner way than how it was implemented before. Alright, so let's get started. By the way, I started a new series on Patreon that covers how to make a 3D Pokemon game like Pokemon Legends Arceus in Unity. So if you're interested in making a 3D Pokemon game or a 3D RPG game in general, then you can check out this course on Patreon. So by becoming a Patreon, you can support this channel and get access to the 3D Pokemon series and get some other cool rewards like the complete project files of the series, some exclusive tutorials, and access to the Discord community. So before we start, I want to say a huge thanks to all the Patreons who are currently supporting the channel. You guys make the series possible, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you. So let's start the video. So to use items from battle, we can push the inventory state if bag was selected from the action selection state, right? So we have already done the implementation of the inventory state, and we've also done the implementation for using an item from the free roam state, right? So here from the inventory state, we're just pushing the party state so that the user can select a Pokemon to use the item on. And from the party state, once a Pokemon is selected, we are going to the use item state and using the item on that Pokemon, right? So the implementation of using items from battle will also be pretty similar, but there are a few differences that we need to handle. The first one is from the battle, the player can only use one item per turn, right? So once the player uses an item, we should not allow him to browse the inventory anymore and use another item, right? So once an item is used, we have to pop the inventory state and go back to the battle. So we have to handle that case from the inventory state. So from here, we can wait for the party state to complete. And once the item is used, we can check if the previous state is battle. And if that's the case, we should pop the state and we should not allow the user to use another item, right? So first, we have to wait for the party state to complete. So we can use push and wait for that. But since this is a coroutine, we'll have to execute it from another coroutine. So here I'll just create a coroutine called select Pokemon and use item. Okay. And let me just push and wait for the party state from here. And I'll also use yield return to make it wait. So once that's complete, we can check if we opened the inventory from the battle. So for that, I'll just check if the previous state is battle. So I'll call state machine.get previous state function, and I'll just store this in a variable called previous state. Okay. And if the previous state is battle, then we have to go ahead and pop the inventory state and return back to battle, right? But before we do that, we also have to make sure that a valid item was used. Okay. So the player could have pressed the back button from the party state. So in that case, an item was not used and he should still be able to browse the inventory and use another item. And in other cases, if the player uses an invalid item, for example, if you try to use an item that doesn't have any effect, in that case also an item is not used, right? So the player should be able to keep browsing the inventory in that case. Okay, so how can we check if a valid item was used or not? So in the use item state, this is the case where a valid item is used, right? So if an item was used properly, then the used item returned by the function will not be null. So this is the case where the item is used properly. So what we can do is we can create an output variable in the use item state function to check if an item was used or not. Okay, so at the top of this class, I'll create a public property called item used. All right, so this will be the output which we can use to determine if an item was used or not. And from the enter function, I'll set the value of item used to false by default. And then if we were able to use an item, then we can go ahead and set its value to true. Okay, in all the other cases, it should be false. All right, so now from the inventory state, we can use the item used output variable of the used item state to check if an item was used or not. And if an item was used, we should just pop the inventory state and go back to battle. All right, so if we use an item from the battle, this will pop the inventory state and it'll go back to the battle state. Okay, so let me just go ahead and call this coroutine from the onItemSelected function. All right, so we have handled that case. So now from the action selection state, if bag was selected, then we have to go ahead and push the inventory state, right? But one thing you have to note is that the inventory state is a state of game controller, right? So it's not a battle state like the action selection state. So we have to push it to the state machine of the game controller, just like we did for the party state. All right. So down here, I'll create a new coroutine called go to inventory state. All right. And from this coroutine, we have to push the inventory state to the state machine of the game controller. So let me just copy this line because I don't want to type the whole thing again. And in this case, we have to push the inventory state. So let me do that. All right. And then if an item was used from the inventory state, then we have to run the turn and continue the battle, right? But from here, how can you check if an item was used or not? The player could just open the inventory and then press back. So in that case, the turn should not be over, right? So how can we check that? So in the case of party state, we check that by checking the value of the selected Pokemon. So if a Pokemon was selected, then we would run the turn, right? So we could do the same for the inventory state. We could create an output variable for the selected item in this case. Anyway, we'll need the reference to the selected item later when we implement things like pokeball throw. Okay, so here I'll create a property of type item base and I'll call this selected item. Okay, and let me just mark this as an output variable by adding a comment. Okay, and from the enter function, I'll set the selected item to null by default. And then from here, when we select an item, I'll set the value of the selected item property. Okay, so we can easily get that from the inventory UI. All right. And by the way, if back was pressed, I'll just make sure to clear the value of select item. All right. So now from the action selection state, After we push and wait for the inventory state, we can check the value of the selected item. Okay, so let me just store this into a variable. And if selected item is not null, that means an item was used, right? So in that case, we have to go ahead and change the state to the runtime state. Okay. And we also have two other things like set the selected action. So in this case, the selected action is use item. And just like we set the selected Pokemon here, we could also create a property in the battle system for the select item. We'll need this later when we implement Pokeball throws. So let's just do this now. Okay, I'll create a property called selected item. All right, and from here, let me set its value. All right, so next, if the bag is selected, we have to call our go to inventory state function. And that's all we have to do. So right now in the runtime state, if the player's action is use item, we're not doing anything because it's handled from the inventory itself, and we're just skipping to the enemy turn, right? Here we just have a line for disabling the dialog box, but we don't even need that because that will be automatically handled when we exit the state. So that is all we have to do. So let's go to Unity and try testing using items from battle. So let me start a battle real quick. And from here, we can try to use an item. Okay, so right now the potion won't have any effect because my Pokemon's health is full. So in this case, our turn should not be over and we should be able to do other actions. All right, so let me try to get my HP a bit low so that we can use a potion. All right, so now if we try to use a potion, it should work. Okay, and yeah, you can see that using item from battle is working fine. So next, we have to implement using Pokeballs from battle. So right now, if you try to use a Pokeball, it'll just go ahead and open the party state just like it does for the recovery items. But in case of Pokeball, we don't want that. Once a Pokeball is selected from the inventory state, we should not push the party state. Instead, we should just go back to the battle state and just handle the Pokeball throw from the battle state, right? So from here, we can check if the selected item is a Pokeball item. And if that's the case, we can just pop the inventory state and go back to battle. Okay. And I'll also execute heal break so that we don't run any of this line. And by the way, from here, we also have to call the use item function of the inventory because this function is responsible for removing the item after using it, right? So we have to call the inventory dot use item function from here. But right now we don't have reference to the inventory. So we can just grab a reference to the inventory from the start function. All right. So let me just define the start function. And from here, I'll call inventory dot get inventory function to get a reference of the inventory. Okay. And now from here, we can go ahead and call inventory dot use item function. So to this function, we have to pass the item to use, which we have in the selected item. And we also have to pass a Pokemon on which the item should be used. But in this case, since it's a Pokeball item, it's not going to be used on one of our Pokemon, right? So we can just pass null over here. All right. So if the selected item is a Pokeball item, we'll just go back to the battle. And while we are here, there is one more case I want to handle. So we should not be able to use a pokeball outside the battle, right? So for that, we already have properties like can use in battle and can use outside battle in the item base. Okay, so this value will be different based on the type of the item. So we also have to handle these things. So from here, first I'll check if we are in a battle. So let me just move this line to get the previous state to the top so that we don't have to call it twice. Okay, and from here, I'll check if we are in a battle by checking if the previous state is battle. Right? So that means we are in a battle, and in that case, we should only be able to use items for which can use in battle is true. Okay, so from here I'll check if selected item dot can use in battle is false. So if it's false, we should not be able to use it. So in that case, we can just show a dialog and return. So let me show a dialog first. Okay, I'll just say something like this item cannot be used in battle. All right, and I'll just use yield break to return from this coroutine. All right, so otherwise, if the previous state is not battle, that means we are outside the battle, right? So in that case, we should only be able to use items for which can use outside battle is true. So let me just copy this piece of line and handle that case. In this case, we have to check if can use outside battle is false, and we'll just print a message like this item cannot be used outside battle. All right, so those cases are also handled now. So next, if the item that the user selected is a pokeball, then we have to go ahead and throw the pokeball while we run the turn, right? So from here, we can check if the selected item is pokeball, and if that's the case, we have to go ahead and throw the pokeball. And otherwise, if some other type of item was used, we don't have to do anything. We can just skip to the enemy move. Okay, so we have already defined the function for throwing the pokeball. So in battle system, we have a function here called throw pokeball. So we can go ahead and use that. And by the way, here we don't need to set the state to busy or anything since we are not using the enum states anymore. Let me also remove it here. Okay, so that's all we have to do. And I'll also make the function public. And now we should be able to call the function from the runtime state. So I'll call battle system dot throw pokeball function. And to this function, we have to pass a pokeball item. So our selected item is actually an item base. So I'll just convert it to a pokeball item using the as keyword. All right. So we have to wait for the throw pokeball to complete. So I'll add a yield return at the start. And after we throw the pokeball, if a Pokemon was caught, then the battle will be over, right? So from here, we have to check if battle over is true. And in that case, we have to break out of this coroutine so that we don't execute any of the code below. All right. So this is all we have to do to use the Pokeball. So let's go to Unity and try testing this. Let me start a battle real quick. All right, so let me try to use a Pokeball. Okay, so in this case, the Pikachu was not caught and we executed the enemy's turn. So we can try throwing another Pokeball, Or we can also try to reduce the HP and then throw a Pokeball. Okay, so the HP is low now. So now if I throw a Pokeball, hopefully I should be able to catch the Pokemon. Alright, so once we catch the Pokeball, the battle should be over. So yeah, everything's working just like before, but now it's much more cleaner, and things like throw Pokeball function is called from the runtime state instead of directly being called from the inventory. Alright, so we're done with the refactor of using items in battle. So I'll stop the video here. If you think these videos are helpful, please leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. That'll really help me out. So I'll see you in the next video.